Today, more than 1.5 billion people identify with a faith whose early decades were marked by a question that would reshape empires. How did a dispute over leadership in the wake of a prophet become a division that reverberates through millennia and crosses continents? In this episode, we will trace the origins of the Sunni-Shia split, dissect the personalities and decisions that widened the breach, and follow the aftermath from council chambers to bloody battlefields and enduring rituals. We will move through moments of intimacy and of violence, reveal the legal and theological arguments used by opposing camps, and show how a single question of succession became a fault line that still affects politics and identity today. It begins with men who knew each other intimately and ended with images that entered devotional memory. But first, a brief note from the sponsors who help make careful history accessible to a wide audience. Their support allows us to consult primary sources and modern scholarship so that we can tell this story with nuance and responsibility. Now back to the narrative, where the stakes are personal, political, and profoundly consequential. Stay with us as we reconstruct the scenes, weigh competing accounts, and ask the central question this story leaves behind. Who had the right to lead the community and why? The morning air in the city of Medina tasted of dust and date palm smoke. Voices rose in the market and in private rooms as the community tried to answer a problem it had never faced before: the death of Muhammad, namely, who would lead the Ummah. At the heart of that question were several people whose names would recur across centuries: Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, Ali, Muawiyah, Hassan, Hussein, Aisha. Each carried different claims based on kinship, counsel, piety, militia, or political control. The argument over succession was not purely theological at first, it was practical and urgent. Resources needed management, enemies waited, and the new community lacked an institutional script for transition. The debate mixed honor and ambition, custom and religious memory. It is tempting to reduce the split to a single moment or a single utterance, but the truth is a chain of choices, each amplifying the next. To understand how the division hardened, we must examine the early councils and assemblies where legitimacy was argued out loud, and then follow how local power became dynastic rule. The protagonist of our narrative is Ali ibn Abi Talib, a figure whose life stands at the crossroads of intimacy with the Prophet and the political storms that followed. He was born in Mecca into the Hashemi clan, raised in Muhammad's household, and known for courage and austerity. He married Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, sharing family ties that to many signified a natural claim to leadership among the Ahl Bayt. Ali was also a warrior who smelled of smoke after campaigns, who felt the metallic taste of battle in his mouth, and who preferred quiet nights of prayer to public acclaim. His supporters emphasized descent and spiritual proximity to the Prophet, while his critics pointed to his youth and to rival claims shaped by wartime organization and tribal alliances. These conflicting narratives framed every step Ali took. In private, he wrestled with duty and danger, remembering the warmth of the Prophet's counsel and the rough noise of tents before dawn. In public, he faced a community that wanted both continuity and stability. This personal history matters because it made Ali both a symbol and a real actor, a man whose decisions could be read as moral or political depending on who told the story. If you are following closely and have been puzzled by competing versions so far, you are not alone. If at this point you are wondering who weighed more, family connection or political control, write family or write power in the comments and say briefly why. Your answers help us choose which angles to explore in future episodes and help create a community of viewers who debate sources and interpretations. We read your perspectives and sometimes turn them into dedicated segments. Now we return to the narrative to see how early incidents hardened into lasting division. The first serious rupture emerged in a series of contested gatherings and declarations that left different audiences with different impressions. One early flashpoint occurred at a place many sources call a desert stop, where a public proclamation was reported by some to have designated Ali as the Prophet's successor. Supporters recalled the scene with sensory vividness: the heat of the sun on robes, the rasp of sand underfoot, and the Prophet's voice carrying across the crowd. Opponents insisted the language was ambiguous or contextual, and therefore not a fiat of succession. That single disputed utterance fed memory and gave later partisans a foundation for claims. Another early episode centered on the council that selected Abu Bakr as caliph. The scene in the shaded courtyard was charged with voices and with the scent of incense and sweat. A series of exchanges unfolded between older companions and younger leaders who proposed different criteria for selection. Some stressed consultation, others emphasized established authority and wartime command. Accounts report direct speech full of reproach and pleading exchanges, where veterans cited covenantal duty and others warned of disunity. The sensory detail in these reconstructions matters because oral memory used images to persuade and to anchor competing interpretations. As the first successors assumed office, the community faced crises that tested authority and escalated tensions. Abu Bakr had to consolidate authority, while campaigns on the frontiers required rapid decisions. Umar consolidated administrative structures and set precedents in governance that would shape the caliphate. Uthman accumulated power in ways that alienated large groups and provoked rebellions. The sound of angry crowds chanting outside the governor's residence, the thud of doors battered, and the metallic clang of a staff used in defense remained in contemporary chronicles. When Uthman was assassinated, the shock was profound. The city felt colder, traders closed stalls, and rumors moved like gusts through alleys. The question of rightful succession returned with intensity. Supporters of Ali viewed his eventual selection as caliph as a moment of restoration. However, the environment he inherited was factionalized and violent. His decisions about appointments and justice were interpreted through the lens of loyalty and suspicion. The battle lines hardened not only around individuals, but around legal and theological claims about authority, precedent, and community consent. Ali's rise to power and the civil wars that followed formed the dramatic core of the split. He entered the capital under the glare of suspicion and the smell of burnt oil from siege lamps. The Battle of the Camel, a clash with forces led by Aisha and other commanders, became a theatrical rupture. In the hours before the clash, the desert tasted of dust and boiled water stood in copper cauldrons. There was a scene of negotiation with repeated exchanges between Ali and Aisha, each trying to define legitimacy and reconcile grievances. The dialogue went back and forth with heat and restraint. Aisha said, "We seek justice for the slain." Ali replied, "Justice will follow if we restore unity." Aisha countered, "Your followers are violating rights." Ali pleaded, "Return to the city and settle disputes." Aisha insisted, "We will not be silenced." Ali addressed the troops and appealed to law and to the Prophet's memory. These exchanges were not mere words, they were wagers on what the community would accept. The battle itself presented sensory details recorded by chroniclers. The iron smell of sweat and blood, the crack of lances, the groan of camels, and the bitter dust that coated tongues. The outcome left wounds that would not close. Another major confrontation came at Siffin, where Ali confronted a governor with naval and financial resources. Negotiations broke down, and the sight of standards and banners flapping in a hot sky signified a broader political contest. Here, a line of dialogue between Ali and his rival echoed through sources. The rival taunted, "You cannot govern the whole." Ali answered, "I will defend the community's unity." The rival threatened, "We will not accept your rule." Ali responded, "Then let judgment be sought." The arbitration that followed created an unexpected faction, the Kharijites, who rejected both sides and insisted on purity of leadership. The Kharijite rejection introduced theological radicalism and violence that made compromise harder. Their harsh language and public executions terrified communities. The echo of their chants in ruined towns and the sting of sharpened blades became part of the memory. These spirals of conflict show how political disagreement turned into theological intolerance. The assassination of Ali in a mosque, the metallic taste of blood, and the hush that followed sent shockwaves through the region. In the days after his death, Hassan, son of Ali, negotiated a treaty that relinquished claims in exchange for promises of safety and stipend. Their negotiation featured a quiet room. Hassan said, "I will step down to avoid more bloodshed." Muawiyah promised safety and honor. Hassan asked for guarantees. Muawiyah agreed publicly, but in private left ambiguities that preserved his access to power. This treaty transformed the exercise of rulership into a more dynastic model and opened the door for Muawiyah to consolidate a family-based rule. The change was not just political. It changed how legitimacy was claimed, as hereditary rather than consultative. And it left many who saw themselves as guardians of the Prophet's line embittered. The march toward Karbala is the narrative's tragic apex. Yazid's accession marked a turning point when dynastic succession met religious protest. Hussein's refusal to give allegiance produced a confrontation that became ritualized memory. The journey to Karbala was described in painful sensory terms in later accounts. The slim taste of river water turned sour in arid heat. The creak of broken wagons, the rattle of armor, the whisper of prayer folded with fear. When Hussein's small band arrived, they were surrounded by a larger force and denied water. The images from that field are stark: the dry clink of metal against clay, the children's hoarse cries, the shadowless sky. Exchanges between Hussein and the commander were terse. The commander said, "Pledge and be spared." Hussein replied, "My allegiance is to truth." The commander warned, "Yield and live." Hussein answered, "To live on dishonor is worse than to die for justice." These short dialogues carried immense symbolic weight for later generations. The killing that followed and the display of heads in marketplaces created a visual language of martyrdom that persists. We must name the constellation of secondary figures who shaped events. Abu Bakr organized the first transfers of authority after Muhammad's death. Umar instituted administrative reforms and led territorial expansion. Uthman's policies and nepotism produced revolt. Muawiyah operated as governor and later founder of a dynasty. Aisha mobilized forces in defense of her perspective on justice. Hassan negotiated a treaty that halted civil war for a generation. Hussein chose martyrdom and left a legacy of ritual mourning. Talha and Zubair and other companions played roles in early battles and debates, and their actions show how networks and personal rivalries influenced outcomes. Each of these figures appears in scenes with distinct behaviors, some arranging councils, others mustering troops, others negotiating under oil lamplight, and all contributing to a shared narrative of contest. To understand the deeper causes, we must consider institutional and theological shifts. Early arguments over succession introduced competing doctrines. One side emphasized consultation and community consent, and developed juristic institutions that prioritized precedent. The other stressed the family of the Prophet and a spiritual principle that certain lineal figures carried unique authority. Over time, these positions generated law schools, interpretive traditions, and rituals that reinforced identity. Political rivalry created historiographies that read events differently, and produced legal canons that justified current regimes. Memory became a tool. Of legitimacy. Scholarly debate about sources shows divergence in early reports and a pattern where later communities read the past through the lens of contemporary interests. Moment of tension 1. The immediate aftermath of a caliph's murder is crucial and must be layered. In the hours when the city learned of the killing, there were exchanges of accusation and pleading in private courtyards. A woman screamed as a messenger arrived, the sound echoing off whitewashed walls, and dogs barked in the distance. A council convened under dim oil lamps where men argued whether to pursue punishment or to calm the streets. One elder said justice must be swift and absolute. Another cautioned that revenge would splinter the community. Their voices rose and fell like waves, and the room smelled of strong coffee and fear. Memory recorded these sensory fragments because they conveyed the existential stakes. The decision to prioritize order altered the trajectory and left unresolved grievances to fester into later violence. Moment of tension 2 is the arbitration after Siffin, which created a political earthquake. The arbitration itself took place in tents by a river. The reeds bowed to the current, and the air held the wet smell of river mud. Delegates spoke in measured tones, attempting to translate warfare into legal formulas. One deputy argued for the validity of pre-existing pledges. Another insisted that battle was the only proof of legitimacy. Between speeches, swords were sheathed, but suspicion remained. The arbitrators announced findings that satisfied neither camp, and in the vacuum, radical fringe elements seized the moment to declare both leaders illegitimate. The noise of dissenting crowds in market squares and the taste of bitter bread eaten in hurried refuge homes marked the social unraveling. This episode demonstrates how legal maneuvers can backfire when political bases are mobile and when charismatic minorities exploit ambiguity. Moment of tension 3 centers on the days before Karbala and the negotiations that failed. The camp smelled of churned earth and stale bread. Envoys slipped between tents with urgent messages, the paper creased under nervous thumbs. Hussein's companions debated the perils of advance and the moral imperative to resist. One advisor proposed retreat to safety. Another argued that yielding would betray an ethical claim. The dialogue was intimate and repetitive, with sentences exchanged in low voices as if to keep hope alive. The final refusal to pledge was a deliberate choice that sealed lives and reputations. After the massacre, the sensory record becomes unbearable. The coppery scent of blood, the hot wind carrying laments, the dry clapping of desert sand underfoot. These images solidified into liturgical memory and pilgrimage rituals that would reenact the pain. Throughout the narrative, sources disagree, and the historian's task is to present evidence while acknowledging bias. Contemporary chronicles, letters, hadith collections, and archaeological finds each bring partial perspectives. Scholars at major universities have debated the chronology and the authenticity of key reports, and have used comparative methods to weigh claims. The interpretations vary by tradition and by later political contexts. What unites most accounts is the observation that early choices about governance set institutional paths that favored certain modes of power consolidation. The transformation from consultative leadership to dynastic rule had consequences for law, religion, and social order. In the months and years after the events, memory crystallized into ritual. Mourning practices for Hussein became annual ceremonies featuring public lamentation and symbolic reenactment. Jurists developed concepts of authority and resistance, and dynasties claimed lineage as a source of legitimacy. New states and sectarian identities formed with theological schools and legal codes tied to political histories. The Sunni-Shia split was not the result of a single battle, but of layered choices about succession, administration, and the sacralization of memory. Over centuries, the split shaped empires, sectarian alliances, and local identities, and it continues to influence politics across a vast region. The epilogue needs to reflect on consequences and resonance. The emotional arc returns to images of loss and endurance. The death of Hussein was not merely a military event, it became a wound carried into prayer halls and into the calendar. The political result was more than a change of rulers, it was the emergence of dynastic pretensions that altered the grammar of legitimacy. For some communities, these changes meant marginalization and a new mode of identity that emphasized martyrdom and lineage. For others, the consolidation of state structures offered stability and juridical coherence. The moral question remains: which forms of authority best preserve justice and pluralism? Today, the split manifests as doctrinal differences and as political alliances where memory and power still intersect. If this account stirred questions, consider subscribing to follow deeper episodes where we examine specific documents and trace how rituals and jurisprudence emerged from conflict. We produce researched narratives that balance empathy and analysis, and we invite viewers to comment with their interpretations, because those conversations guide future investigations. Thank you for following this reconstruction of a pivotal series of events that shaped the Islamic world. The split between Sunni and Shia is a story of personalities, institutions, and symbols that continues to matter and to teach us about how communities handle succession, memory, and legitimacy.